Welcome back to everybody. And as you know, we're talking about a variety of different subjects. There's no structured curriculum with this. I'm telling you about various kinds of topics. And so one of the things on our list of topics in this series is when and where essential oils are a primary modality and when they should be avoided. Now, this is a good transition topic into the first major topic that we're going to get into, which is a continuation from last week on prana. And we're going to link that over to chi as well. So we're going to be looking at essential oils through the lens of Ayurveda and through Chinese medicine. And this gives us a lot of very interesting perspectives on what aromatherapy is, what essential oils are, and that will give us something directly that we can apply to therapeutic applications. Because all of this, we want to bring it back to what do we do with these oils and how do they benefit us, but it's also something that we want to consider from a spiritual standpoint. And so one of the main things that I feel about herbal medicine in general, and that includes essential oils and aromatherapy, is that they open up all kinds of doorways into perceiving the universe. And through that perception, that it can become a spiritual practice. So I don't think of essential oils as just a product, you know. I don't think of this as, oh, this is just an essential oil and now we're going to do aromatherapy. To me, every essential oil and every herb and every food is something that's very meaningful and it's full of life force. And that life force is very profoundly mysterious and complex and intelligent. And that is the same life force that's in the plants that is also in the human body. And that's what we'll spend some time looking at. The relationship between the plants and the human body, and the link is the life force. So the topic that I wanted to start with is about when aromatherapy and essential oils are really the main application and when they aren't. And there's a lot of confusion about this. And I don't know how things are up in your neck of the woods in Canada, but here in the United States, the field of aromatherapy is really, I would say that there's two main camps. There's three main camps, actually. And it has come about because of the impact of multi-level marketing. And so we have one camp that is really poorly educated and driven by marketing. And this is creating a real mess. It's creating a pandemic of poisoning cases. And on the other hand, there's a reaction to this. And the kind of evangelical, fanatical, cultish aspects of multi-level marketing have really turned off a lot of people. And the poisoning cases and people hurting themselves and their children and their pets and their families are so widespread that there's a huge backlash now against aromatherapy and essential oils. And a lot of people don't even want to talk about it. They're closed-minded. And then we have the third camp, and this is where we should be, is we have people who are educated and know what the essential oils are and what they do and get the benefits from them. And we don't want to be in any of those extreme camps. We don't want to be fanatical about oils, and we don't want to be against them either. We don't want to be going around telling people that they're a rediscovered, miraculous, lost form of medicine that Jesus used. And we also don't want to be thinking that they're completely dangerous and we should stay away from them. They are a form of botanical medicine. That's all they are. They're nothing more than a highly concentrated form of botanical medicine. And of course, the more concentrated something becomes, the more knowledge and care we need. So here is one way to look at this very simply, which is a pyramid, and that is, what do we have at the base of the pyramid? We have food. And then we have above that food grade herbs, things that are very safe, like peppermint and chamomile. And then above that, we have more medicinal grade herbs that we can take in their whole plant form that are relatively safe and biocompatible. And then suddenly we jump up and we're into concentrated botanical medicine in the form of tinctures. And then we go even further and we get into the tinctures that are really strongly medicinal. You need some clinical level education with it. But then at the highest level of concentration and potency that requires the most education and the most care, you have essential oils. And so somehow the strongest form, most highly concentrated, most dangerous form of botanical medicine has just been unleashed on the public through marketing. And as a result of that, there are lots and lots of problems. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that all you have to do is dilute the essential oils and bring them back down to the biocompatible level, and everything's okay. But another thing that we have to understand, the next part of that discussion, is that there are places where the oils come in contact with the body according to different methods of application. And depending on the method of application and where the oil comes in contact with the body, there are different therapeutic benefits and different kinds of risks. So we'll start with this, and this will give us a link then to prana and chi. Now, essential oils have several ways that they can be used. I automatically take out internal use of essential oils because it is so risky and there's no need to do it. And I also advise, for the most part, against using undiluted essential oils directly on the skin. Now, there are some exceptions to both rules, but it requires more education to do it. You can't just tell everybody, you tell your friends to start drinking essential oils, as you know. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of the adverse reactions are coming from. So what are the main ways that the oils come in contact with the body? And this will be a good setup also for one of the files of looking at combining oils with herbs. Because if we know the main routes of administration and the strengths and weaknesses of each of those routes of administration, then we can use them very effectively. The main problem with not knowing this information is that people are using aromatherapy in ways that is not really that effective or even just contraindicated. So the four main areas that we can use essential oils have to do with where they come in contact with the various channels of the body. Now, keep in mind that this is an important principle when it comes to combining aromatherapy with other kinds of treatments also. So number one, obviously, is going to be the respiratory system. And so we say aromatherapy. That means a therapy based on aromas, but it's a lot more than that, because if you have an essential oil in steam and you're doing the steam inhalation, the aroma is all kinds of things. It's all those hundreds of different kinds of compounds. And they're combined with steam, and they're going to come in contact with the sinuses and the mucous membranes. And that's going to create a kind of discharge and drainage, and it's also going to be antimicrobial. And that effect is going to go all the way into the respiratory system. And one way that we can prioritize this in terms of where is it the most powerful, you can look at the nose, and it looks like a triangle. And you just take that triangle all the way down to the bottom of the lungs. And at the base of the lungs, that's where you have the least effectiveness of aromatherapy. But in the sinuses, you have maximum concentration. So when we think then about where do essential oils come in contact with the body and at what potency levels, we can see that the first place that they come in contact is through the respiratory system and at the most concentrated level in the sinuses. Then their effects are going to spread slowly down into the respiratory tract. And so what that means is that as we inhale the essential oil vapor or steam, then it will continue to have benefits because it will continue to come into contact with the respiratory mucous membrane down into the upper part of the lungs especially. But once it gets past that, its effectiveness begins to diminish until finally we get to the lower lobes of the lungs. And if you know your anatomy and physiology, you understand that gaseous exchange slows down quite a lot as you get down to the lower part of the lungs. So what happens then is at the bottom of the lungs, the lower lobes, there's very little gaseous exchange. We have to inhale and exhale something like 30 times for there to be any actual exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, whereas it's happening with every breath in the upper lobes. So that's why this model of concentration is really good. And that means that the most concentrated way to use essential oils is actually for treating sinus conditions, using them in steam or direct palm inhalation, or just in the diffuser. All the ways that we use essential oils where they come in contact with the respiratory system, the most powerful effect is in the sinuses. And that's important for several other reasons. Now, if we know that, then we can automatically apply this to therapeutic principles. And we can say, well, how effective is aromatherapy for, say, sinusitis infection? And it can theoretically be highly effective because of that. It doesn't necessarily always mean that, because the sinuses are actually, a complex ecosystem. And a lot of times there's infection that's lodged very deeply. But it makes aromatherapy a primary treatment, okay, because of its proximity and it's coming directly into contact. But if you say, well, what about COVID pneumonia, which is inflammation of the entire respiratory system? Well, it's not going to be so effective. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a role in deeper conditions, because essential oils and aromatherapy are strongly concentrated, antimicrobial and so forth, and they can be used for deeper infections of the respiratory system. But what happens is that they become more of a supportive adjunct treatment rather than a primary treatment. Whereas upper respiratory conditions, essential oils and aromatherapy really can be a primary first line of treatment. And herbs are secondary, actually, in a lot of cases. So this is important to understand. When do we use oils, number one? When do we use herbs, number one? When do we use them together? How do they work, and so forth? And that's just with the respiratory system. Now, there's another interesting link that happens between the concentration in the sinuses and the next major system that essential oils work on. And for this, I'll give you a little historical background from classical medical systems. So in Western medicine, if you ask a medical doctor, so what's the anatomical route of the breath? And, they tell you, well, it goes in through your sinuses and goes down through your trachea into the lungs. And if you study classical medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, Unani medicine, all of these classical medical systems, and you look at the diagrams that they had an interesting thing, and that is that they didn't say the breath goes from the sinuses to the lungs. They said the breath goes from the sinuses to the brain first, okay? And so what you see then in the anatomical charts and in the old Chinese medical diagrams is you see the breath going from the sinuses into the lungs, and I'm sorry, from the sinuses into the brain and then down into the lungs. So what these classical systems were describing is the physiological effect of the breath as opposed to the anatomical structure of the respiratory system. And this is the second major route that aromatherapy works on. And we know that because aromatherapy has such a strong effect on mood. And so therefore what we see is that the olfactory limbic link is the next major route, connecting point. Okay. And we don't need to get into the details of how that works, but basically there's a neurological route, and then there's a circulatory route. And I did talk about this a little bit last time in terms of some of the therapeutic applications of this. But what's most important here is that there's a lot of recognition now coming about the olfactory and neurological relationship. And one of the most important things is that it is now being discovered that neurodegenerative conditions are directly related to environmental toxicity. And people who live near busy highways are getting a lot more toxicity, and people who work in agriculture and all these kinds of exposures to toxins, they have higher rates of risk for neurodegenerative conditions. And what that means, of course, is that the brain's only that far away from the outside world, and whatever we're breathing into the sinuses will affect the brain. And part of it is the neurological activation, and we talked about that last time. You did a little meditation, breathing the essential oil and noticing that everything happens immediately. As soon as you breathe it in, it's in your brain, basically. So that's the olfactory limbic link. And then, of course, from the limbic system, it spreads out into the endocrine system. And through that, it has, systemic effect. So this is another major route. Now, another very important system to consider is the skin. And essential oils on the skin are actually fairly problematic because it depends on the species of the oil and the concentration, whether that's going to be helpful or harmful. So this third therapeutic application is really kind of secondary, because essential oils can be used, have been used in all kinds of preparations for the skin. But what we see historically is that the aromatic plants were prepared instead. All right. And the aromatic plants, say frankincense resin infused into a carrier oil, is totally different than putting frankincense oil directly on the skin. And this is especially the case when things are more dermotoxic, when there's more potential for burning. So the applications to the skin, of course, are related to several different therapeutic benefits. There's the skin, of course, and several kinds of oils and preparations can be helpful for skin conditions. But it also includes musculoskeletal system, because that's how we can use aromatherapy for treating inflammation in the joints and pain and swelling and injuries and all these kind of things. And so that's the third major route, is on the skin. And then the fourth major route, and this is where there's a lot of confusion, all right, is digestive system. And the place where people are confused is that they're looking at these studies that say essential oils in a petri dish will kill these pathogens, and therefore you can translate that into taking them internally. And it doesn't work that way. So essential oils have several kinds of properties that are actually not really very therapeutic. And the two most important things to think about here is, number one, there's actually three. And let me see if I can remember all three of them now. The first is, essential oils do not give us any nutrition, okay? And therefore, there's really no need to take them internally. They don't have nutrition, all right? They have compounds that can be very beneficial for things, but the problem is that the second issue is that essential oils are very inflammatory in nature. And that's directly linked to the consistency that they have, which is that they will dissolve cells. All right. So I've had some interesting discussions with essential oil experts, and when they know their chemistry, they say essential oils, the closest thing we can compare essential oils to in terms of their chemical consistency is gasoline. You know, it's a solvent. It will basically just digest your mucous membranes. And so they may have some compounds like limonene that we would like, but you can't ingest it because it will burn the mucosa. It'll digest the mucosa, actually. So this is chemically a real problem and where a lot of people are being hurt. And then finally, the last aspect of essential oils that are very problematic for internal use is that they're very drying, okay? And also on the skin, they can be very drying. Now, that sets up certain limitations of what we can do and not do. And if essential oils don't give us any nutrition, and if they burn the lining of the gut and they're drying in nature, then that means automatically that it's extremely limited what we can do in terms of therapeutic application. So for example, with the respiratory system, we can breathe the essential oils, and they have various functions, expectorant and decongestant and mucolytic and all those kinds of things. But we need other kinds of support to treat deeper problems. We need to have demulcent properties, which means hydrating, mucilaginous properties, mucoprotective properties, and the essential oils will not do that. That's where we have a tremendous opportunity to combine medical systems, where we use botanical medicine in different forms, and essential oils is one form. It's only one form. Herbal medicine is another form. And so this is why you can see that some of the best treatments for respiratory conditions are the combination of the external essential oil in steam and vapor and so forth with the internal use of the herbs to support the mucous membrane. So now this is especially important when it comes to the digestive system, which is where I left off, because you really can't do much with essential oils for the digestive system. There are some very, very limited applications of what you can do if the essential oil is properly diluted. All right, if it's say peppermint essential oil diluted in a base of olive oil in an enteric coated capsule, this is a specific treatment which you probably know about for treating irritable bowel syndrome. All right, but it's something that has to be done very carefully, because even when it's diluted and even when it's in that enteric capsule, irritable bowel syndrome is a very sensitive thing, and it may be helpful or it may make things worse. So when it comes to the internal use of the essential oils in virtually any form, okay, essential oil, even diluted in a carrier oil, you have to be very careful. And there have been a lot of various products that have come out. Oregano oil in olive oil, which is definitely better than just taking undiluted oregano oil. But even when it's diluted and then it's in a capsule, if that person has gastritis, you're going to cause some damage. Okay. So we have to be very careful because of this caustic solvent-like nature of essential oils in the mucous membrane. And of course, the easy way around that is just don't do it. Give the whole plants instead. And the aromatic plants, as tea, are almost always safe and benign. And so instead of ingesting oregano oil, we can take dry oregano leaves in tea, peppermint tea and ginger tea and tulsi tea and all these kinds of things. These are biocompatible forms. The essential oils are caustic. But there are a few things that are potentially, excuse me here, ginger root. There are a few things that are potential ways to use essential oils for the digestive tract. And I'll mention these. First of all, there's the tea itself, all right? That is totally safe for the most part. And it's because we're getting the essential oils in a biocompatible level. So when you drink something like Tulsi tea, the Tulsi essential oil will not be caustic. You take 1 drop of Tulsi essential oil, it will be caustic. So that's the difference. Now, there are 2 major ways that we can use essential oils for the digestive system safely. One is very diluted for abdominal massage, right? And that is working partly on a mechanical basis, partly because it's also getting a little bit of absorption into the abdomen, and to a large degree because we're stimulating the olfactory system. And that's the next way that we can think of how to treat the digestive tract. And this is very important for some people. And that is that we can activate the vagus nerve through the olfactory system, which will then stimulate the digestive tract. So spice oils, for example, are the most toxic, dermotoxic, and inflammatory of all the oils. Oregano oil is the one that is the most commonly abused and the one that is causing the most adverse reactions. But there's also thyme oil, and then there's ginger and cinnamon and tulsi and many kinds of spice oils. And these are the most dangerous to work with, and these are the ones that cause the most problem. But these are the ones that also work the best at stimulating the appetite. And so therefore, another method is just to put them on a perfume strip. And what I found is that oregano is the one that works the best for this. Oregano oil on a perfume strip, you give it to somebody, they will immediately think of pizza or something delicious like that. And their digestive juices will get going and they'll start to feel hungry. Now, who's that going to be good for? Well, it's good for everybody as we get older, because after a certain age, our hydrochloric acid starts to go down and we start to get all these digestive weakness problems. And especially when elderly folks are living alone and they start losing their appetite, they start losing their interest in food, they're not taking care of themselves so well. These things happen. And one of the ways to stimulate the appetite in elderly people is give them a spice oil to smell it. And then they might start to feel hungry again. And then, of course, there's a whole population of people who are on chemotherapy. And chemotherapy is very damaging to the digestive system, as we know. And one of the main concerns while people are going through chemotherapy is keeping the appetite going and just keeping people eating. So aromatherapy has applications, therefore, for the digestive system. But it's very dangerous to use it internally, but we can use it in these other ways. So just to reiterate, the 4 major routes are the respiratory system, but concentration level is highest in the sinuses and upper respiratory system. And then the olfactory limbic link, and then the skin dermal applications, which also includes musculoskeletal, and then the digestive. Now, you may say, well, what about all the other organ systems? And at that point, we start to see that aromatic plants are also fairly focused in certain systems, and they're not used so much for other organs, all right? They're used to help formulas, all right? And this is a big herb class. I'm not gonna go into this, but I'll just give you some of the basic principles. So we don't use aromatic plants so much for say kidneys, all right? We use other kinds of herbs mostly. And we don't use aromatic plants so much for, say, neuroprotection, building the brain. Aromatic plants don't have the same kind of adaptogenic longevity supporting properties of a lot of herbs. And that's because they don't have the same kind of nutritional capacity. Aromatic plants don't give nutrition. Aromatic plants do have some benefits in enhancing digestion, which gives us nutrition. And so that's why in Ayurveda, for example, you find these tonic formulas, and they're very rich with adaptogenic herbs. And heavy nutritive herbs that build the tissues and so forth. Things like, ashwagandha and asparagus root, shatavari and amla, and all kinds of nutritive herbs. Now, those things build the body, they hydrate, they give nutrition. But the aromatic plants that contain essential oils are added to those formulas, not because they give nutrition, but because they help digest. All right. So that's a little overview of the four main levels of the body and the routes of administration that essential oils have. So this is a little bit more of a medical therapeutic kind of application, but it is one of the primary topics that is in our list of things to cover. So now I want to go back and let's do a little meditation together. Do you have a flower oil? Go ahead and pull out a flower oil and a perfume strip. So we'll do a quick review of some of the principles that I gave you last week that have to do with the biospheric pulsation of the flowers. But I want to link them together now at kind of a deeper level and then go off into the next topic. And I'm just digging around here and giving you all a few minutes to pull up your favorite flower oil. All right. So I'm going to use one of my favorite flower oils, which is helichrysum. Actually, I changed my mind because I think this next one is a better example. What we're looking for are the flowers that we can easily see some kind of biorhythmic pulsation and study that and what that means. All right, so I'm going to use chamomile. And chamomile has somewhat of a daily rhythm. It has a biorhythm of producing more essential oil. It's not opening and closing, however, like a lot of the flowers, like the one that I showed you in the little video last time. And at the same time, it has a seasonal biorhythm, and it has a daily, and it has a lunar biorhythm. All these things are all in the flower oils. So let's just go ahead and you can put a couple drops of an essential oil on a perfume strip. And close eyes. Go ahead and sit back, close eyes. Take a deep breath. And then just breathe in the fragrance. And notice specifically that this fragrance has the seasonal cycle in it. This oil, whatever flower you are breathing the oil of, was distilled in a specific season. Notice that seasonal biorhythm. And breathe again. And this time, notice the daily biorhythm that's in it. In other words, whatever flower you are breathing, it was creating the aromatic molecules on a daily basis, following this cycle of the sun. Now, it could have been at night also, but see if you can smell that. The daily rhythm. And now, breathe it again, and this time see if you can smell the influence of the moon. Because all flowers, as I described, have a relationship to the moon. And you'll remember that the time when flowers tend to produce the strongest essential oils is when the full moon is setting and the sun is rising. And see if you can feel the influence of that. All right, now I'm going to introduce a couple other aspects of this biorhythmic pulsation for you. And this is something that you probably know if you have studied the therapeutic applications of the flower oils, both academically and experientially. Breathe it again and notice that inhaling a flower oil has a calming effect on the heart. And the heart is a pulsation. It's a biorhythm. And now breathe it again. And notice that inhaling a flower oil also has a calming, regulating, opening effect on the respiratory cycle. All essential oils work on the respiratory system, but flower oils have a unique kind of relationship to the biorhythm of the respiratory cycle and the cardiac cycle. And now breathe it again. And this time, notice, just remember that flower oils are the first choice for a lot of stress and dysregulation of the nervous system and adrenal system, the neuroendocrine system. Okay, so flowers help to regulate the biorhythms of the neuroendocrine system. So breathe that in. Aromatherapy will help to basically lower the stress of sympathetic nervous system overstimulation. And from that, you can inhale it and remember the flower oils are also one of the main choices for helping to regulate the sleep cycle. And you can breathe it again. Remember the biorhythmic qualities of the oil, the intelligence of the flower that is biorhythmic in nature. And you can remember the flower oils are also one of the primary treatments, first choice, for hormone balancing as well. So it's neuroendocrine balancing. Neuro for adrenal, stress, sympathetic overstimulation, but also neuroendocrine for balancing female hormonal rhythm, especially. Okay, so take a deep breath. And now, see if you can connect with that flower oil. The season, that it was producing its oil, the sunlight, the daily rhythm. It produced the oil at a certain peak time of day or night, produce the oil at a certain peak time of lunar cycle. That biorhythmic pulsation of the flower actually goes directly into our biorhythmic pulsations, supports good sleep, biorhythm of waking and sleeping, supports hormonal balance, supports the neuroendocrine biorhythmic fluctuations, supports calming the heartbeat, which is biorhythm, and the respiratory cycle. All right. So you take a deep breath, stretch, and now I will tell you what just happened, and I will explain it in terms of Chinese medicine. So I gave you a article last time, and it was called Essential Oils and Shen, Spirit. I hope you had a chance to review this, but I'm just going to go through and I'm going to tell you all the stories in it without lecturing or reading this to you. I'm just going to tell you some things about Shen, because what we just did was we used a certain category of plants, a botanical category of plants, flowers, for a particular purpose that is well known, always has been. It's a very ancient use of this particular kind of botanical medicine. And we have different ways of explaining it in terms of Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and modern science. So this biorhythmic aspect of flowers and the creation of the essential oils, this of course has a biological purpose for the flowers themselves. And they were doing it a long time before we came along. So you might know that roses are much older than Homo sapiens. And you might not know how much older, however. Homo sapiens are approximately 1 million years old, and roses are approximately 30 million years old. So roses have been around a lot longer than we have. And roses are relatively new arrivals on the earth. Some of the oils that we work with, their relatives go back 100 million years, okay? Some are even older. So why this particular pulsation? Why was that morning glory opening and closing? And why were the flowers doing this? Well, the biological reason, obviously, is reproduction. And it's a signaling mechanism to the pollinators, right? And the pollinators are the symbiotic life forms with flowers. So that's the biological reason. And the main thing we can say then is that these molecules are molecules of attraction, all right? Now, all essential oils have antimicrobial powers. In other words, they repel things. And there is not a single oil that will not significantly inhibit and eradicate microbes. All essential oils are an expression of the plant's immune system. As a matter of fact, we could say essential oils are the distilled molecular form of the plant's immune system. But some oils also have a dual function of attracting, all right? So an antimicrobial is something that repels and protects. But at the same time, some things also signal to certain species. So the flowers do both. The flower oils are antimicrobial, but they're also attracted. So they're simultaneously killing things, repelling things, and attracting things. And the conifer oils do that also. You know, the conifer oils are primarily produced by the trees so that they can protect themselves. But at the same time, that's how trees talk to each other, okay, is through molecular language. Now, this signaling mechanism is happening on this pulsating basis. All right. And so now what we understand through that little exercise and having a little understanding of the biology of how the oils are produced and why, we can see that there's a parallel in the human body. And that parallel is our own biorhythmic activity. Now, there's a definition of herbal medicine that I can give you that's very helpful to remember, and that is that we are using compounds that plants produce for themselves for parallel human purposes. All right. So again, we are using compounds that plants produce for themselves, but for parallel human purposes. Now, the reason that there's this parallel human purpose with herbal medicine is because the plants came first, and then the human body is designed to be in a relationship with the plants after that. And I will touch on that subject in several different places, but I just want to mention here, we've already seen an example of it, and that is the opening and closing of the flowers and the pulsation of the heart and the cycle of the breath and the waking and the sleeping. All of these things are all linked energetically together. And so in a certain way, we can say, well, all right, there's these compounds in lavender oil or geranium oil or clary sage oil, and when they go into the endocrine system that they do this and so forth. We can look at it that way. Or we can just say, well, we're becoming part of this bigger energy field of function that's in nature. And part of it is in the flowers, and part of it is in the breath, and part of it is in our brain, and part of it is the relationship with the flowers and the pollinators. But it's all this manifestation, okay, of this broader intelligence that's following the cycle of the sun and the moon. All right. And so that's how we can start to think about aromatherapy in sort of a more cosmological way. Now, what does this have to do with Shen? And what is Shen? Well, Shen is a term that's used in Chinese medicine primarily for diagnosis and treatment, but it's an example of the close link between classical Asian medical systems and spiritual lineages. And this is just a quick historical background that Chinese medicine grew, evolved, developed, completely entwined with the same principles as Taoism and Qigong. So as a matter of fact, Qigong practice is part of Chinese medicine. And the same thing in Ayurveda, that Ayurvedic medicine grew and developed and evolved completely entwined with yoga and Tantra. And that means that the classical Asian medical systems are infused with spirituality. They are infused with spiritual practice and inseparable from spiritual practice because the terminology, the cosmology, the principles are exactly the same. The same foundational principles are there. So Shen is both a medical concept and a spiritual concept. And Shen is both used in medicine and it's also used in meditation. Shen means spirit, all right? But it has a lot of different dimensions of what spirit means. It can mean divinity or God. But in medicine, and the reason that it's applicable here in aromatherapy is because when we use flower oils, specifically flower oils for their major therapeutic benefits, we are treating what are commonly called Shen disturbances in Chinese medicine. That's mostly what flower oils treat. And you may not know it, but you are treating Shen disturbances. So the way that I learned about Shen disturbances in Chinese medicine was kind of vague. And it's because it's a vague concept. It's not articulated very well, but I gradually learned to translate it into my own understanding. So the way that I learned about Shen was that Shen means the light in the eyes. And of course, that's rather vague because Light in the eyes. Well, that, I mean, this was like class number 1 at acupuncture college. Okay, that we look for the Shen. We look for the light in the eyes. Well, that's an impossible medical concept. You know, there's no such thing as a Shen meter. You know, you can't measure light in the eyes. It's an intangible thing because people with good Shen can actually have like really terrible appearance of their eyes. And people with really clear white, you know, sclera can also have terrible Shen. So it's not about the physical appearance of the eyes. It's about something else. It's about the brightness of the eyes. Well, what is the brightness of the eyes? So there's another teaching they give you after they sort of befuddle your mind with that. And then they say, well, a person with poor Shen, dull Shen, dull spirit, has kind of a wooden appearance. Oh, what is a wooden appearance? That sounds like a Chinese medical concept. Well, then you gradually learn that there's all these other manifestations of good Shen and bad Shen, okay? Or bright Shen and dull Shen. That's a better way to say it. Bright Shen, a bright spirit. What is a bright spirit? Well, a bright spirit is someone who is really present, okay? And so Shen, I gradually came to appreciate, is really our presence, all right? Someone with a bright spirit is present, okay? Now, presence means a lot of different things, but a person with a wooden complexion means that they're not really there, okay? Now, what does all this mean in terms of clinical practice? Well, we then learned that people with a bright spirit are going to have a good attitude, all right? So all of a sudden now it's starting to make more sense. Aha, it's psychoneuroimmunology, all right? It's optimists versus pessimists. And we know that optimists have less illness and live longer. And that's because of psychoneuroimmunology, which means the effect of our mind on our immunity through the nervous system. So Shen starts to look like this modern concept of how positive our mind and emotions are. And indeed, that is a major determining factor of bright Shen or dull Shen. And what we find out, furthermore, is that people with a bright Shen can overcome serious diseases, whereas people with a dull Shen have difficulty overcoming even simple things, all right? So that's psychoneuroimmunology again. That's the effect of our mind. So if we have a really positive attitude, that's going to make us a survivor, all right? And this you can see, you know this over and over again in clinical practice. There are the people that are given bad news about their health. They immediately rise to the occasion and say, okay, this is going to be a spiritual practice. This cancer is going to be my teacher. I am going to beat this thing. I'm going to learn from it. That's a bright Shen that thinks like that, okay? Metabolizes emotions like that. A dull Shen is going to be somebody who gives up or just says, you know, acquiesces to whatever the doctor says and goes into it. And those people don't have the same outcome or prognosis. It's well known that people who really are fully engaged, they're going to get better results. And furthermore, even if the results don't come out as good as they should, even if the results are bad, the person gets something positive out of the experience, all right? So that's the power of Shen, is to transform negative emotions, digest things, negative conditions. So it's, you know, our spiritual brightness. It gives us fundamental kind of wisdom, and that's also part of Shen, spirit. So people who do a lot of spiritual practice, and I will say, you know, I've been fortunate to actually meet and spend time with some holy people in my life, and I will say that they are the examples of bright Shen. Okay. Now, there's another really interesting aspect of Shen that connects to aromatherapy, and that is the character for Shen. in the Chinese language. And it has two different parts. The character is like, and then the second part that's very interesting is a square. Okay. So when you're writing, calligraphing the Chinese word for Shen, visualize a square and then visualize four corners. Okay, so it's a square with four corners in it. And then there's a brush stroke that goes right through the middle of it from the top to the bottom. So it looks like this: square, four corners, and then brush stroke right through the middle. Now, this is a very interesting old Chinese concept. And it has a lot of relevance, actually, to what we're talking about, because this square means something very symbolic. It means a field of earth, like a farm, a field of earth. And this means four corners. And four corners means four directions. Four directions means space, because space is east, west, north, south, okay? And the four directions then imply time. East means morning, south means midday, west means afternoon, north means evening. So the square with four corners symbolically then represents time and space. Embodied life, physical matter, time and space. And then right through the middle of that, there's a brushstroke. And that represents vapor. So spirit, according to this beautiful image, spirit means vapor infused within matter. And vapor infused within matter has all kinds of interesting connotations, like aromatherapy and psychoneuroimmunology and the pulsation of flowers, and all the things that we've been talking about can all be kind of summed up with this idea of vapor infused within matter. So vapor infused within matter has, of course, very profound spiritual dimensions. And this is something that's at the root of Taoism as a spiritual practice and Qigong, because it is said that we emerge from Shen, okay? And a very simple description of the cycle of life is that Shen becomes energy, Qi, and then Qi becomes blood. In other words, we come from spirit and then we become energy, and then we manifest in form, and blood then becomes a body. So in other words, first we are spirit and then we are energy, and then we are the mother's red essence, and then we actually are in form. And all of these things are going through transformation. So spirit transforms into energy, energy transforms into blood, blood transforms into matter, matter transforms into birth, and birth transforms into growth, and growth transforms into age, and age transforms into old age, and then old age transforms into death, and death transforms into emptiness. And this happens to us, whether we want it to or not. And then guess what emptiness transforms into? Emptiness transforms into Shen. And so that's the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, according to Taoism. So that's one spiritual dimension to this. But guess what that's linked to? That whole cycle is linked to taking our first breath. And then at the end of life, our last exhalation. You see, so every inhalation, exhalation is actually the infusing of Shen into form. Right? So the respiratory cycle, of course, is our connecting point with aromatherapy, because the respiratory system is the main way that we can convey the essences of the plants into the body through the breath, you see. And then if you look at it, what are we treating primarily with the flower oils, especially? I mean, not just flower oils, but especially flower oils. What are we treating? A lot of times we're treating this difficulty of being embodied, and we're treating the disorders of vapor infused within matter. So what are the disorders of vapor infused within matter? Well, this is the whole practice of returning to the Shen in Chinese meditation practice, is that we would like to become free of this cycle of time and space. All right. And that's, again, that square, four corners, vapor infused within matter. And then if we look at that, what that means is that, okay, our consciousness has no form. Mind is intangible. And yet here it is. And every day we're confronted by the fact that we're in a body. And the body is under all of these influences of nature. And I don't know how many of you have felt this, but I think it's pretty natural that we all feel, wow, the body has a lot of limitations. You know, nature is really like oppressing my spirit here. And I would say that probably the oldest, most universal spiritual longing that humans have been to escape the bonds of the flesh. And that's because we're in this cyclical existence of day and night, getting older and older. And these biorhythmic aspects of nature cause the mind disturbance and unhappiness and stress. And so what are some of the common manifestations then of a Shen disturbance? All right, that's what we're treating. Aromatherapy is one of the best ways of using plant medicine for a disturbed spirit. And what is a spirit disturbed by? Ultimately, it's disturbed by the stresses of being in a body and in nature. Okay, but Shen disturbance, according to Chinese medicine, has two primary forms at either end of a spectrum. Yang and yin. All right. So what is a yang type of Shen disturbance? That's going to be active. It's going to be aggressive. It's going to be manias. It's going to be anger. It's going to be rage, and it's going to be agitation, and that's going to be anxiety. All right. Yang type of Shen disturbances, active, fiery by nature, restless. Yin type of Shen disturbances are going to be withdrawn, depression, darkness, lack of motivation, these kind of things, inertia. And so this is just a different way of saying the whole spectrum of, you know, anxiety and depressive disorders. That's all. Manic depression. That's the whole spectrum right there. And so that covers Shen disturbances. And Shen disturbances are everything from really garden variety stress that we have all the way to really serious, you know, mental illness, schizophrenia. And what it comes down to is our consciousness is disturbed. And consciousness is disturbed ultimately by its relationship to the body and the world, okay? And the way out of it is to evolve back towards Shen, to return to Shen. And the more we are returning to Shen, the healthier we become in terms of our mental, spiritual, emotional well-being. And so the return to Shen is the spiritual goal. Now that happens whether we like it or not. We're all going to return to Shen. But the question is, how comfortable are we right now in this embodiment? So in this particular article, I broke it down here, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. is that we can think in terms of categories of essential oils for treating Shen. And you're already doing that. If you're an aromatherapist and you're treating stress, you're treating Shen. You're treating the #1 Shen disorder. And obviously, right now in society is Shen disturbed. And everything that's been going on, fear, depression, everything falling apart, grief, sadness, all of these things affect the Shen, okay? And we have different levels of Shen brightness that we can respond with. And so if our Shen is really strong, we can respond to this thing in a spiritually healthy way. It's not like we're going to get out of having stress nowadays. It's how are we going to metabolize the stress that's the issue, all right? So we have all kinds of Shen disturbance that's happening. We're going to have a big Shen disturbance over the next week. Things here in the United States are going to get really increasingly agitated. And, you know, we can see that people everywhere are getting Shen disturbed with, you know, misinformation and internet and all these kinds of things. Shen is a really good model to explain a lot of things going on right now. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, how about some aromatherapy? So in this article, I basically broke it down into 4 main categories of oils that can be used in different ways for Shen, all right? And I use a term here, pranavata, and I'm going to explain that next. So the 4 categories of oils have both modern research and a long history of being used, and not just as essential oils, but really as plant form as well, because they have significant effects on the mind and the emotions and sleep and relaxation. And all of those things are the basic criteria of what Shen is. The hormonal balance, the hormonal cycle, the calm pulsation of the heart, cardiac rhythm, waking and sleeping. All of these things are expressions of Shen. And the 4 major groups that we can go to, and these are not the only ones, but these are the main ones. Number 1, the oils that calm and lift up the spirit, all right? Because those are the 2 extremes, because anxiety needs to be calmed and depression needs to be lifted up. And the beautiful thing about aromatherapy and Shen is that they have a polarity. So that when we are administering aromatherapy of flowers especially, they work on the limbic system in a way that it has this dual function, you see. Flower oils especially are both anxiolytic and antidepressant. And these oils not only uplift and calm the Shen, but through that they rejuvenate vitality. You see, because this is how we get run down, is when the Shen is chronically disturbed, then the vitality of the body decreases. Immunity goes down, okay? And as that's happening, the Shen is increasingly disturbed. So this helps us get good sleep. And this is part of this first category of oils. And therefore we say relaxant anxiolytics and nervine tonic antidepressants. Now, if we classify essential oils like that, then automatically we have parallels with herbal medicine. So relaxant anxiolytic oils can be paired with relaxant anxiolytic herbs. And if we take the herbs internally, we're going to get several benefits that the oils do not do, and vice versa. The herbs taken internally are going to circulate through the liver and circulate through the heart and circulate into the brain. And they're going to have hydrating effects, and they're going to have certain levels of nutrition. And they're going to be able to have anti-inflammatory effects and so forth, okay? And then we breathe the essential oils in, and they're going to go straight to the brain, okay? They're not going to digest. They're not going to go through the liver. They're not going to pass through the heart. They're going to go straight to the brain. And that way, what we have is we put together relaxant anxiolytics and nervine tonic antidepressants, and we feed the body some forms through the digestion, and we feed the brain other forms through aromatherapy, okay? And these oils are well known. You already know the relaxant anxiolytics. Lavender and clary sage. Palmarosa is one that I have found is very similar in nature to those. Geranium, rose, most of the floral oils are in that category. Now, the next major group of oils that are directly beneficial for Shen are those that can release repressed memories and emotional traumas. Okay. And this is a perfect example of a Shen disturbance. PTSD is the spirit is disturbed. And that disturbance of the Shen with PTSD is affecting everything. It's affecting all the other biorhythms, all right? And so in order to treat PTSD, you have to purify the memory banks. And the way that that is done is to bring things out into consciousness while at the same time being very detached and in a state of equanimity, so that the memories come back and there's no charge associated with them as being, you know, something that the ego is still responding to. The sense of self is no longer threatened by memory, basically. That's a big subject, but there's a few essential oils that are known to be very beneficial. And the main one is the Himalayan spikenard, also known as Jatamansi, and valerian oil, which is the worst smelling oil in the world, but clary sage is also in there. These are oils that actually release deep neurological trauma by getting very deep sleep. And in the deep sleep, people have healing dreams. You see, now this is a very interesting aspect of aromatherapy that I invite you all to consider, and that is, what are the oils and how to use them in such a way, especially combined with herbs and meditation practice, that when you go to bed, your body feels so good that you have healing dreams of light and release. You see, because healing dreams are actually based on the mind projecting the body sensations of peace and comfort and release. And we don't actually have to do a lot of psychotherapy on ourselves. All we have to do is we have to find how to get into that physiological state of peace, okay? And we don't have to solve problems. All we have to do is get out of the neurological blockage, okay? And if we get out of the neurological blockage, the problems are solved. We're not in that neurological situation anymore, all right? And so this is a shortcut in a way, because we don't need to relive the past. We just need to get the brain into the present, okay? And these oils can help to do that. I'll just mention this for your consideration. This is a very deep level of healing in the subconscious, okay? So the Jatamansi is really intriguing because people, it's a member of the Valerianaceae family, and people generally don't like the smell, but it has a really intriguing effect, and that is that it stimulates psychedelic dreams. But you wake up feeling refreshed, unless you really overdo it. And then you can ask, well, why do you feel refreshed after you had these incredible dreams? That's because the brain is metabolizing things, okay? It's digesting things. And so the Jatamansi actually makes the brain feel good, and the brain feeling good is projecting all these images around it in the internal environment of, wow, I feel good. Okay, so that's what Jatamansi is doing. We can supplement that with some of the sleep-inducing herbs as well. All right, the third main category here, oils that uplift the mind and the heart by evoking spiritual moods, all right? What's a spiritual mood? Well, there's all kinds of spiritual moods. There's, for example, how do you feel if you're putting a little piece of frankincense on a charcoal and you're participating with the smoke that's going out into the atmosphere, okay? Thanksgiving and gratitude, love and kindness and compassion and unity and biological connectedness and all of these kinds of things that happen when we go into a peaceful state inside of ourselves. Boundaries dissolve a little bit. We feel more empathy, okay? We start to feel a little bit more sort of compassionate, detached sensitivity. All of these spiritual qualities are actually showing us they are manifestations of the brightness of a Shen is starting to infuse our otherwise constricted personality, all right? So the oils that can help us do that uplift the mind and the heart by evoking the spiritual moods, are generally the oils and the woods and the resins that have been used forever for spiritual purposes. So agar wood, the most hypnotic, deeply relaxing fragrance. You put a little bit of agar wood powder on a heater, okay, on a vaporizer. You don't burn it, that's barbaric, okay? You heat it slowly, and that evokes a mood that is very reminiscent. People remember, oh wow, this smells like a temple I've been in somewhere and I don't remember it. It's very meditative fragrance, okay? It's aloes wood, the aloes wood of the Bible. Sandalwood and frankincense and palo santo and rose and lotus, and then some of the exotic flowers. Cistus is in there also. So these fragrances are directly linked to Shen because these are fragrances with spiritual purposes, and they have been used that way forever. And so then the last category here, oils that enhance cognitive functions in general, all right, especially concentration and learning and memory, and those that prevent and reverse neurological degeneration. And that includes all aromatherapy, actually, because aromatherapy is an external stimuli to the brain. And we know that dementia and neurodegenerative conditions are counteracted by stimulating the brain through the senses. And so, excuse me, the more you can activate the brain through all the different senses, the more you're going to reverse or stabilize or keep your cognitive function going. So those are going to be things like the conifer oils and the eucalypti, and again, the flowers, lavender, and then of course, Melissa is known to be specifically for protecting cognitive function. And that falls in the category of one of our topics, which is a traditional use of an essential oil that was originally in the plant form. You see, lemon balm was originally a cognitive supporting herb, and now we can use it as aromatherapy. And those that stimulate the mind. Rosemary is really, really good, stimulate the brain. All right, so I'm going to wrap up that topic. And I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the other files here and go through several topics all at once. And then this will give you your homework assignment. So there's a couple of things that we can talk about quite easily here. And there's two files that are connected here. One is essential oils by botanical categories. And then the one that's paired with that is called the primary function of the botanical category. So let's look at these. And this is going to start to set the stage for understanding some of these bigger topics of prana and Shen and 5 elements, and how we can use contemplative aromatherapy to study the oils and so forth. So I have, excuse me, I have already introduced the basic group of oils that are related to Shen, and that's the flowers. And now you know that there's this entire cosmology of sun and moon and pulsation of the flower, opening and closing, and the production, the rhythmic pulsation of the molecules for attraction. And what happens when we breathe that in? It goes into our biorhythmic pulsations. And that is unique to flowers, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen share. And if you had the opportunity to look through this before class, you already know what this is. And here it is. First group, medicinal flowers. Now these terms need a little translation, or why I labeled these. So medicinal flowers include 2 major chamomiles and clary sage and geranium, and it might be the rose geranium variety or not. and then helichrysum, and then all the lavenders, and then rhododendron, and there's others as well, but these are some of the main ones that are found in aromatherapy practices. And we say, why medicinal? Well, that's because these are used primarily for medicinal purposes. And we contrast that with exotic flowers. Now, here's the way that this group works, all right, is that all exotic flowers are also medicinal, but not all medicinal flowers are exotic. So what do I mean then by exotic? So we have champa, and then we have some unique things like a co-distillation between geranium leaves and roses. Okay, rose petals and geranium leaves. This is a co-distillation that has been available for some time in the aromatherapy world. Then we have the jasmines and the lotuses and the rolly orange blossom and the roses and ylang ylang and so forth. And what makes these exotic? Well, first of all, they're a lot more expensive, and they are produced in much smaller quantities, which makes them expensive. And a lot of times that has to do with the yield. So for example, you know that something like 7,000 pounds of fresh picked rose petals are required to get 1 liter of essential oil. And combine that with all the ecological stresses that are happening. And that's why true rose oil is so expensive. And that's why there's so much contamination and adulteration. So the exotic flowers, the way I describe it is they have medicinal effects, all right? And those medicinal effects, I will describe the effects next in the next file, but I'll just say that the medicinal flowers tend to be used more for therapeutic purposes. Like helichrysum is a perfect example of a medicinal flower. You see, it's used for trauma, bruising, soft tissue impact, you know, soft tissue injuries. And it's not a major oil for perfumery at all. It's a medicine, whereas jasmine is a major perfume ingredient. No jasmine, no perfume, they say. And therefore, one of the things that we can say about the difference here of these categories is that the exotic flowers have a much stronger effect on consciousness. But that also means that they're medicinal because they have stronger effects on consciousness. So the next group, citrus oils, and here's an abbreviated list. There's obviously a lot more than these. And then there's the spices. And this is probably one of the bigger groups of essential oils. The basils, so many basil oils, and that includes tulsi and black pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, clove, fennel, ginger, all these things. There's so many spice oils, so many spices. And then we come to the sacred scents, and I introduced that already. I gave you a little bit of background on the meaning of a sacred scent, okay? And I'll continue with that in just a minute, but here's a list of some of the frankincenses. Okay, there are many species of frankincense, over 28 species. Sandalwood, Palo Santo, the respiratory. This is a group that I call the respiratory oils. Okay, so you'll see that I have classified these according to both botanical types and functional types. So medicinal flowers and exotic flowers are just 2 subdivisions of flowers. All right, that's a botanical type. Citrus is botanical type. Spices, there's all kinds of botanical types here. There's seeds and there's barks and all that sort of thing. And then sacred scents, that's a historical classification. These are used for a purpose. And then respiratory, this is a therapeutic classification, that the eucalypti of all these different species and the conifers, juniper, pine, spruce, fir, all of these things, these are used specifically for respiratory conditions. And then finally, the last classification that I use is the unique antimicrobials. Now, all essential oils have antimicrobial powers, but I am using this for some limited numbers of essential oils that are recognized as having very specific kinds of antimicrobial functions. So Manuka, the lemon-scented tea tree, Niaouli, which is a Melaleuca, a type of tea tree itself, and Ravansara. All right, now that is the first file, which is the botanical classification. I'm giving this to you now, but we're going to be talking about this over and over again in different settings, all right? So this is kind of like the first system. Now the next one, primary functions. This will help you to understand a lot of aromatherapy in a very short period of time. If we classify essential oils into major groups, we don't have to study every individual oil. We can study the whole group. And what we find is that entire groups have very similar chemistry, and entire groups have very similar functions. And therefore, if we study the similarity of all the flower oils, then you know how to use a whole bunch of flower oils. And you don't have to know the details of every oil. It's just a good reference system to absorb a lot of information about a lot of species quickly. So here's the next file. And this is the primary functions of those botanical therapeutic categories. So what are the main functions of the medicinal flowers? Well, you already know. It's calming and uplifting to the shen, to the spirit. So relaxing to mood and mind, anti-anxiety, shen. Calming to the nervous system, that's also shen. Uplifting and antidepressant, shen. Cooling, anti-inflammatory, okay. And they support the female hormonal balance. That's the biorhythm. These have low dermotoxic potential. Now, this is a really good system for helping to understand more specifically about what oils are safe and why not. Because a lot of times everything just gets sort of thrown together, and people tend to say, well, essential oils are safe for this, or they're not safe for that. But you have to look at things actually more on a case-by-case basis, depending on the species. And then you can understand there's patterns, all right? So the flower oils have low dermotoxic potential. Now, I always start with the cautionary principle, all right? And that is, never assume that something is safe when it comes to essential oils. Because you can say that lavender oil is safe for direct application, undiluted on the skin. You've probably heard that, but you may not have heard that 90% of the English lavender is now contaminated, okay? And you may not know that 70% of essential oils at the retail level are contaminated and adulterated, all right? So what that means is that you're not just dealing with an essential oil anymore. You're dealing with all kinds of other unknown substances, but you're also dealing with an individual skin condition, an individual skin sensitivity. So we can say low dermotoxic potential, and in general, that is true. In general, if you put ylang ylang oil on your skin, it's not going to burn you. If you put geranium oil on your skin, it's not going to burn you. In general, but you cannot make conclusive statements unless you know the exact oil and the individual, all right? But it's a good starting point. Putting flower oils on the skin, undiluted, is safer than putting cinnamon oil on the skin. And the flower oils tend to be the most beneficent for the skin. These are the oils that you will choose to put in your skincare formula. And they're also anti-infectious. I mean, flowers also have tremendously powerful beneficial antimicrobial effects. Then we come to the exotic flowers, and these have the same overall properties as medicinal flowers, but they have stronger uplifting effects on the mood and stronger antidepressant effects. They are stronger relaxants, and they are stronger anxiolytics. And also they're stronger sensual aphrodisiac oils. which is where the perfume comes into perfumery. And these oils also have a stronger effect on the female hormonal balance than the medicinal flowers. Now the citruses, a few things to say about citruses, and that is citruses, as you know, they are high risk for phototoxicity. That means you do not put them on the skin undiluted and then go out in the sun. Although I imagine in many parts of where all of you are up there in the wintertime, it probably doesn't matter. Then there is mood elevating effects. The citruses are mood elevating. Citruses are also gently relaxing. So the citrus oils are all sort of in the category of simple happy oils, okay? But they also are supportive in treatments, diffusers, steam, and so forth for anti-infectious properties. Now we come to the spices. And the spices are a unique category in themselves, and they are generally the highest risk for burning the skin, high dermotoxic risk. But they're also the most stimulating of the oils, all right? And that is why we can use the spice oils in certain ways to wake us up, keep us concentrated, and keep us mentally alert and so forth. And they tend to be more antidepressant. You see, the flowers are more calming and gently mood uplifting, but the spices are more stimulant and heating. And when we are in depressive states, we need more stimulant energy. We need stimulant, heating, energizing kind of vitality. And that's what the spices do. They are warming to the circulation. They are strongly anti-infectious and antimicrobial. Some of the strongest of the antimicrobial oils are things like oregano and cinnamon, but that makes them also the most difficult to work with. They are appetizing, and I gave you a good description of this. Put them on a perfume strip and give them to somebody who's going through chemo, and it will keep their appetite strong. And these are very good for respiratory and digestive systems if used correctly. All right. Then the sacred scents. These are the woods and the resins that we looked at, frankincense and Palo Santo and agar wood and so forth. These generally have fairly low dermotoxic potential, but sometimes it can go up to medium high. All right, so we have to be careful with some things. Palo Santo, for example, can be irritant on the skin, but these are mood elevating and they are also calming. Very good for supporting meditation. And again, they continue on with the anti-infectious and antimicrobial. Frankincense has been used forever for its antimicrobial powers. These all support the respiratory system, especially frankincense. And they are beneficial to the mind and to the nervous system, okay? And then the final, or next to last group actually, the respiratory oils. These are the eucalypti and the conifers. And I call them respiratory oils because these are the oils that have been used from the beginning when humans first had relationships with trees. We used eucalypti and conifers for the sauna and for the sweat lodge and for respiratory conditions. These have low dermotoxic potential, and this is really good to know that you can take a couple drops of eucalyptus oil, put it on the palms and breathe it in the shower, rub it on the chest. It's not going to burn you. You don't want to do that with cinnamon oil. These are expectorant and decongestant and antitussive, stopping cough. Tridoshic for respiratory problems. What does that mean? That means that Vata people can use them, Pitta people can use them, and Kapha people can use them. And what does that mean? That means people who are thin, dry, nervous, Vata people, mostly overstimulated sympathetic adrenal system. They can use these oils and they're good for respiratory problems. Pitta people, what does that mean? That means people who are strong, robust, and tend to have excess vital heat, okay? They can use the respiratory oils for the same functions. And then what about Kapha people? They are the people with slow metabolism, prone to excess weight and fluid stagnation and phlegm congestion. Well, they can use these respiratory oils also. And this is a really nice little tangent to go on here. Tridoshic means that we don't actually have to have any diagnosis at all about our body type. And essential oils are tridoshic in nature. This is a really nice thing about aromatherapy, is that when you start to use aromatherapy, guess what you're doing? You're bypassing the entire digestive system and you're going straight to the brain. And what that means is you don't have to be so concerned about the diagnostic parameters of the patient that you have to be concerned about with herbal medicine. So with herbal medicine, you've got to think about all these things. Like, what's the strength of the stomach? You know, a lot of patients, they need something in the liver. They need something in the joints. They need something in the blood or somewhere in the body. And you can't get it to them because they've got GERD. They've got too much acid and reflux in the stomach, and you can't give them the herbs that they need because the herbs won't get past the stomach, you see. So this is a really interesting thing about aromatherapy, is that you're basically bypassing the constitution. You're bypassing the organ systems. You're bypassing even a need for a diagnosis. You don't even need to have a diagnosis with aromatherapy because aromatherapy is so gentle and it works through the olfactory system. And as long as you don't misuse the oils, as long as you follow the safety protocols of aromatherapy, you can treat anybody, any body constitution. And because it's going to be going in through the olfactory limbic link, okay, it's going to be having a completely different effect than diagnosing and treating with herbal medicine. All right, let's see, where are we now? The unique, oh, there's a few more things. The respiratory oils are also antimicrobial, anti-infectious, and purifying. Conifer oils and eucalypti oils. #1 group for diffusers, atmospheric purification. But they're also uplifting and clarifying to the mind. And it's surprising, but eucalypti oils and conifer oils are surprisingly beneficial for musculoskeletal issues. Finally, the unique antimicrobials. These, depending on the species, have either low or high dermotoxic potential, and they are significant anti-infectious and antimicrobial in nature. All right, so I'm going to stop with that. And here is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to pause, and I'm just going to open it up. And I will see if anybody would like to go ahead and have a little discussion about what we've covered, because we've covered a lot. I've been going on nonstop now for 1 hour and 45 minutes. And I just want to hear if you have any questions, if you would like to have some further discussion to metabolize any of this, if you would like to challenge any of the assumptions that I made. And you can open it up, Jeffrey, for raising hands, and then we'll make sure we get everybody's thoughts and concerns taken care of, and then I will come back and do another file. So let's see here. Jeffrey, I'll go ahead and take one of these off the chat first, and you can tell people how to raise their hands after that. So my partner was struggling with a bout of depression right at the beginning of last week's session, and your discussion on rose, helping us transition from dark to light, encouraged me to give it a try. And I just want to say the transformation was amazing. They're like a new person, so thank you for the suggestion. I'd been using orange and neroli, but nothing made a change like rose. Okay, nice, beautiful. All right, Jeffrey, you want to tell people how to raise their hand?
Great. You can raise your hand by clicking the participants button at the bottom center of your Zoom interface. That will open up the participants panel. And then at the bottom center of that panel, you'll find the raise hand button. I will unmute you. If you want to appear on video, you can turn on your video as well. But if you don't, then don't.
Okay.
All right, we have a question. We have a hand up from Adrian, who also just put a question into the chat. It may be the same question. But let's find out.
Hello, Adrian.
Hi, David. My question is in the chat.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, thank you for putting your question in the chat and for raising your hand. And I'll just go ahead and read your question then. In my work and experience with postpartum style depression, I have been using flower oils, rose, and neroli. Your description of life cycles in relation to Shen disturbances post-birth was very integrating for me. Thank you. Any comments, thoughts on flower oils for postpartum birth cycle biorhythms? You're the expert. Okay. So you have been working as an aromatherapist and you have been specializing in this field. So rather than me presuming that I know more than you in this field, why don't you share a few of your experiences, and then I will round it out if anything comes to mind. Would you be open to doing that? Okay, well, I guess the answer is no on that.
I'm just trying to get Adrian unmuted again.
Oh, I see. Okay. Are you there, Adrian?
I hope you're getting the request.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah, I am.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. So
sorry.
would you mind taking the opportunity to share your professional expertise with all of us before I add something more? Which I probably don't have a lot to add to your experience, but tell us.
No, it's more experience for me. I am an aromatherapist, but since having my qualifications, I've just been in postpartum. So I actually haven't had much work except for in my friend group and my own personal experience with postpartum style, like depression and struggles around the birth cycle biorhythms. So yeah, I've just been integrating rose and neroli in my personal use and for sleep and for connection with Shen.
Nice.
And just trying to kind of bring myself back to center after, having 2 children. And that's been, really deep and powerful for me. So I just thought perhaps maybe you may have a thought that pops into your mind about, the biorhythms around birth and some of the oils. Yeah, just to gain more insight because, I am just going from my own experience and that within my small friend group.
Right.
At the moment, yeah.
Okay, well, this is actually a fairly big subject, and
Yes.
what I can say is that the use of the flower oils is definitely the first choice. Okay, but you also can apply the same principles we're talking about of Shen with herbal medicine as well. Okay, and so what I would suggest, the main thing is don't think just in terms of aromatherapy, or don't think just in terms of herbal medicine. Okay, the future is these two systems coming together. And the reason that I mention that is because there's so many aromatherapists that don't actually know much about herbal medicine. And there's so many herbalists that don't know much about aromatherapy. And really, to get the best results is when we bring those two things together, you see. And so with postpartum depression, we're going to think about herbs that basically lift the Shen. And we're going to think also about the liver, you see, especially in Chinese medicine. We're going to think about things that help to move the stagnant liver qi, all right? And there's so many different possibilities with this, but I'll just give you a very simple example of something that comes to mind. And I know it's specifically indicated for this. And that is the flower essential oils also come in tinctures, you see, and they also you can make tea out of them as well. So may I suggest that you try the tincture of linden flowers? Have you tried linden flowers as a beverage?
No, I haven't had the pleasure, but one of my dearest friends is a doctor of Chinese medicine and a mother.
Okay,
So I'll be calling her.
Okay, nice. Well, Chinese medicine doesn't use linden flowers so much. But here's the thing is that linden flower tincture is a really important medicine for hypertension, blood pressure, stress, all these kind of things. But it's also in the category of things that are really good for the Shen, you see. And so any of the flowers that you are using as essential oil form, you can also think in terms of taking them as tinctures, and then right away you have a dual function.
Mm.
So if you're using rose, you can take rose as a tincture, and you can take rose as rose petal tea, you see.
Mhm.
And so you can apply the rose oil, and that way you're getting it through the olfactory limbic link, but then you drink the rose tea and you're getting it through the digestive system. And then you can add a little bit of rose tincture to that also. Okay. So
Mhm.
that way you're saturating yourself with roses from all of the channels. All right.
Mhm.
And that's a fundamental principle. And that's also in that file that I gave, combining herbs and essential oils. And that's the starting point for this kind of integration of these two systems. It doesn't have to be complicated. You just take an essential oil and use it in your aromatherapy practice, but then make a tea out of the same species or use the same species as a tincture. So you're going to have a much more powerful effect of Tulsi if you drink the Tulsi tea and you have the Tulsi essential oil in the diffuser. You're going to have a much more powerful effect of lavender if you have the lavender in the bath as an essential oil, and then you have a lavender aromatherapy in the diffuser, and you drink the lavender tea, and you add a little bit of lavender tincture to that, you see.
Yeah.
So that's a starting point for a discussion that we'll have in subsequent classes also. So I hope that was helpful.
Very much so. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. All right. How would you, excuse me, how would you classify the grasses? Okay, such as vetiver or lemongrass with respect to the botanical therapeutic categories, would the grasses be a category on their own? Well, here's one of the things about classifying things is you can't always fit everything nicely into a box. And we can say it is a botanical category, sure. But here's the main thing that you will notice if you look at the botanical categories I gave. We can say certain things about that are in common with all the species in a category. We cannot say the same thing when you put all the different grasses in. And so the reason that you can't say that is because the grasses are so different. You see, vetiver is totally different than lemongrass, all right? Now there's similar characteristics, of course, between lemongrass and citronella, but vetiver is totally, excuse me, vetiver is totally different, all right? And so that's why I didn't put them in that group, because whenever I put them in a group, I always give the common therapeutic benefits, and you can't do that. But that doesn't mean we can't put them in a box. We can, and we will. And where we are going to do that is going to be in another system that has more to do with 5 elements. Okay, and there's different ways that we can classify things and learn a lot very quickly about the different essential oils. So let's actually do a quick scan here of another file that illustrates this. You probably saw that there's a file titled Agni and Soma oils. And this is just a very brief summation of things that I've talked about now a couple of times that have to do with sun and moon, okay? But I'm introducing the language a step at a time here of Ayurvedic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine. And so here it's classified according to Agni, yang, and Soma, yin. And so Agni is the sun and Soma is the moon. And the sun is yang, and its qualities are hot and dry and stimulating. And the moon, as you learned, is cool and moist, hydrating, calming, and sweet. You remember the whole story about making pearl peace tea last week. So Agni then, or the way that we say this, is that certain oils are really rich in Agni. And certain oils are really rich in soma. And if an oil is rich in Agni, then it conveys those energies, and you can see the effects of those energies on the body and the mind. So if an oil is very rich in Agni, sunlight, it's going to be strongly heating. And those oils are going to be spice oils. So black pepper and cinnamon and clove and tulsi, ginger, oregano, and thyme, those are going to be strongly heating. They're going to have a lot of sunlight in them, okay? And what you're going to see when you use them is that it infuses the body and mind with Agni also. They stimulate the digestive fire. They stimulate circulation. They warm the body. So what are we doing then in terms of the cosmology of aromatherapy? We're infusing the body and the mind with sunlight and heat that has been captured by these particular species that have a relationship to Agni. And so therefore, we can say that plants are a bridge between cosmological energies and elements and the same cosmological energies and elements in the human body. That's another way of describing herbal medicine, okay? I gave you the first definition. Herbal medicine is using the compounds that the plants produce for themselves for parallel human purposes. But this definition is that the plants are the bridge that connect the cosmological energies and elements of nature to the cosmological energies of the body. And therefore, oils that are full of sunlight and heat will have that effect on the body. And of course, that takes us back to basic diagnosis, and that is we're going to use these things for cold conditions. So mild aromatic spice oils are also in this classification system. It's just that they're not so hot, okay? They're more neutral. But then we can also say, and we always have to have justification, we have to have a plausible reason to make these parallels or these correspondences. We can say that the citrus oils that are very phototoxic, those have a connection to Agni. And that's literally true. You put those oils on the skin, they enhance the absorption of ultraviolet light. And they actually look like, you know, little suns, okay? But here's the thing about citruses. If you're going to classify a citrus fruit like an orange, okay, clementine or something like that, you say, well, it looks like sun, like a sun, okay? But it's full of water. But the peel is full of these compounds that basically cause the absorption of ultraviolet light. And so from the aromatherapy standpoint, in terms of connecting these parallels, what we say then is phototoxic essential oils cause enhanced absorption of Agni, and that can burn the skin badly, all right? Then we also can classify the rubefacient oils, and those are the oils that if you put them on the skin, they create enhanced heating effect through increasing the circulation. And those are going to be things like birch and wintergreen, which are toxic oils, but they're widely used in all kinds of athletic products for enhancing the circulation at the surface. And so therefore, those oils also contain sunlight, a lot of sunlight. Now the opposite is soma, moonlight. And we talked about this specifically last week with roses. And this is the cooling flowers, okay? Clary sage is cooling. Clary sage is in a group of oils that always does something predictably. I'll just have a little tangent here if you don't mind. And that is aromatherapy is not predictable, not the same way that herbal medicine is, all right? If you take a laxative herb, it's going to move your bowels, whether you want it to or not, whether you believe it will or not. Aromatherapy, generally, because it is working through the olfactory and limbic link, all right, mostly, it is much more subjective, and there's a lot more liking and disliking. That's part of what the limbic system does. Now, depending on which route of administration, there's different degrees to which it will work. So for example, if we inhale eucalyptus oil into the sinuses, it will mostly decongest the sinuses and have an antimicrobial effect, whether we believe it or not, you see. But when it comes to the oils that are working specifically through the limbic system for relaxation, mood upliftment, all of these oils we just talked about, for Shen, okay, treating Shen is not a guaranteed cause and effect, all right? And so what you see then is lavender oil for some people is really relaxing, and for some people it's not relaxing at all. And that means that all of these descriptions about this oil does this emotionally, and it does that emotionally, and it does this mentally, and it does that to your mood and all that, it breaks down a lot of times. Aromatherapy is not an exact science when it comes to our spirit and our mental states and emotional states, all right? But there are a few oils that will always, almost always, repeatedly do something. And one of those is Jatamansi oil, will almost always give people psychedelic dreams and deep sleep. And clary sage will almost always cool down hot flashes. So it's in the category of an oil that will do something repeatedly. So the cooling flowers, clary sage is the best example. It will cool heat. Lavender, helichrysum, ylang ylang, geranium, cameocystis, jasmine early, all the flowers are cooling by nature. And then calming and grounding roots, and that's where we get vetiver and jatamansi. Cooling woods, sandalwood is a cooling wood, and then the floral hydrosols. So this is a very simple way to kind of sum up what we talked about last week, sun and moon, all right? And the parallel here in the human body is that we have the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic is Agni, it is sunlight, it is activity, stimulation, increased metabolism. Soma, parasympathetic, cooling, relaxing, all right? And we see that the elements are involved also. So excessive sympathetic stimulation dries us out and heats us up. Whereas parasympathetic cools us off and it helps to rehydrate us, you see. And there's all kinds of fascinating examples of how this happens in the body and how herbal medicine supports it or counteracts it. And this is how aromatherapy can be linked to it. And again, we can also see this polarity, Ida and Pingala, solar and lunar currents in the yoga system and pranayama. And that's a symbolic representation of sun and moon inside the body, those polarities. So we are made in the image of the sun and moon at that particular level. All right. I think that's a nice place to conclude things. But let me go back, and I see quite a number of things that come in the chat here. And I'll just go through these very quickly, if you don't mind running a few minutes late. Where do flower essences, not essential oils, not tinctures, where do they fit in? As I understand their creation, flower essences do not use plant material, but the Shen and prana of the plant. Yes, flower essences are the homeopathic subtle energy preparations made from flowers. And therefore, they treat very subtle energy types of things. They're really good for kids and animals, and they're really good for sensitive people, and they're really good for kind of a deeper level of emotional sensitivity kinds of issues. You are correct. It's like the Bach flower remedies, you know, what is the name of the name of the most famous Bach flower remedy is eluding me at the moment. It'll come in just a minute, but that's what a flower essence is. Okay, rescue remedy. Thank you. Okay, rescue remedy. Okay, so Jennifer, I see you raised your hand. You want to go ahead and speak to us?
Yes, I did ask my question in the chat, but I'm specifically wondering about the healing dreams that you were speaking about and what specific practices using essential oils, if you can give a little bit more detail about that.
Well, the only thing that I know that is reported consistently is the use of the Himalayan spikenard for the effect on consciousness. Okay. And this is because the Valerianaceae family has this kind of effect. People get this also when they take valerian herb sometimes. Now, it's hard to get the Jatamansi now. There's political things going on about its availability in the market. Hopefully it's going to be resolved. But it's an incredible herb. It's an incredible oil. And the method, according to classical Ayurvedic use, 1 teaspoon warm sesame oil, put 1 or 2 drops of the Jatamansi oil in it, and then massage that on the bottom of the feet. It's got a very strong smell. It's very tenacious. It's a fixative oil. And you also have to keep in mind that while it will help you sleep and get very nice dreams, it acts as a stimulant to cats, which is worse or stronger than catnip. And so you may be getting walked on while you're getting your good sleep. And specific practices, well, this is an example of this kind of subjective nature, because that's really the only oil that I know gets this kind of report repeatedly. All right. Other oils, they tend to be more subjective. I have heard this and experienced it a bit also with clary sage. Clary sage is also known for doing this. But then we see that there's actually even more opportunity for this in the world of the plant medicines. And at the same time, this is very subjective as well. So there are things that, you know, there's a whole community of people that use herbs and study herbs for their, you know, hallucinogenic effects and entheogenic effects, and for visionary purposes and dreaming, lucid dreaming, and all these kinds of things. And I know that one of the ones that's a favorite is the stamens of the blue lotus, made into a tea and taken before bed. And I know that the Palo Santo is very psychoactive also. And especially if you're breathing higher amounts of it. That's how they use it in the ceremonies. They actually lock a person up, close them up in a room with the shaman with no air ventilation, and they fumigate with a lot of Palo Santo smoke. And it's very, very psychoactive. So there are lots of plants that do this, but that's a whole course right in itself there. And then of course there's all the different things that you can combine it with in terms of meditation and yoga and pranayama and visualization and prayer and all sorts of things. So learning how to do conscious lucid dreaming or healing dreams in general, I'll just say that aromatherapy can play a very important role in it, and herbal medicine can play a very important role in it, but the specifics of how to do it for each individual, I think, is quite different. Okay. So sorry I can't give much more information in our limited amount of time here. But experiment. I mean, that's the thing, is just see what works. And keep in mind that with healing dreams and lucid dreaming, the intention is just as important as the substances. And I'll mention that some of the most interesting kind of dream experiences that I've had actually have to do with taking medicinal mushrooms. And I don't mean the psilocybe, the entheogenic mushrooms. I just mean things like reishi mushroom. You know, the presence of mushroom consciousness in our brain while we're sleeping is very interesting. So I have had, I've consumed a lot of medicinal mushrooms over the years. They're a big part of my, health routine. And sometimes I have taken very large doses before bed, and they're definitely somewhat psychoactive. So you could try something like that. Is that helpful? All right. Let's see here. I think that's about it. I think, okay, so somebody's requesting the pyramid of plant medicine. I didn't put it in the file, but I'll just give it to you again one more time here, and then I think we'll have to stop. And that is, foundation is going to be food, okay? And then above that's going to be food grade herbs. things that we can use in our cooking, pot herbs, things like nettles and things like that. And then we go into the medicinal herbs that are milder. And then we go into the stronger herbs. Those are going to be things like golden seal, echinacea, things that you can't live on as food. And then it takes a big jump up and it goes into extracts. So tinctures, herbal tinctures. And then from there, it goes into clinical level semi-toxic herbs that are really important for a lot of cases. There's a lot of herbs in tincture form you've never heard of. You've never seen them. They're not available unless you're a clinician. And when you use them, you use 1 or 2 drops at a time, okay? And then at the top, guess what? Essential oils. So that's why I gave you that adverse reaction list to look at. All right, so somebody enjoyed the aromatic journey of prana article. Thank you. Where did the plant come from? Sunny areas. I'm not sure what that question's related to, but okay, I think we covered everything. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your interest in this wonderful, magical field of using plants. And that's medical, it's spiritual. It has ecological ramifications because we're supporting the farmers and sustainability, hopefully. I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along also, because there are some complex sustainability and ecological issues with aromatherapy as well. And so, yes, you're most welcome to all of you putting the thanks there, and have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful week, and use your oils safely. And now I hope you have some new dimensions of how to think about the oils. Go ahead and go through all the files. I'm going to keep bringing these things over a week at a time because they keep piling up. We will have plenty to talk about next week also. And so, Jeffrey, thank you to you also. And so good night to everybody. Have a wonderful, safe week.